Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just not going to use the microphone. Welcome. What a great turnout. We're so glad you're here. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second lecture in our keynote speaker series. Fáilte, the Allure of Celtic Performing Arts in Canada. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Wojciak. I'm the Development and Outreach Manager for the Vancouver Island Symphony. And I love when we can connect over music outside of the concert hall, as we are this afternoon. Come on in. So first of all, while you are pulling out your phones and making sure they are on silent, I will take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Pinnacle Pharmacy and Long and McQuaid Musical Instruments. Of course, without their support and your attendance today, well, we wouldn't need to have a lecture, but anyway, without their support, we couldn't make this happen. The whole inspiration for today's lecture is, of course, our upcoming symphony concert. In about 8 days' time, we welcome the Celtic tenors from Ireland to perform at the Port Theatre with our symphony orchestra. We had the Celtic tenors a few years ago. It was a fantastic concert they presented. And fortunately, not this weekend, because I'm not ready for Christmas yet, but next weekend, we will get a full Christmas program a la style of the Celtic tenors. So you will, if you haven't already, bought tickets for that concert, and after this afternoon, have some incredible perspective on the origins of what they're presenting. There's a Friday night concert, which is unusual for us, Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening. I will say the matinee concert is almost sold out. So if you haven't got your tickets and you were hoping to go to the matinee, please do so in 1 hour's time. Pull out your phones, turn it back onto noisy, and buy the ticket right away. But Friday and Saturday, there are still tickets available. I have a feeling that our presenters are going to fill the hour easily with information, insight, entertainment, and music. I have had the pleasure of working over the last few weeks with our speaker, and she seems bursting at the seams to share her passion for Celtic music and performance with us. As teenagers from different sides of the country, Carolyn and Renee first met Highland Games. Both educators and judges in their respective areas, dancing and bagpiping, they traveled across Canada and beyond with the arts as both culture and competition. Currently celebrating their 25th year of presenting CeltFest Vancouver Island, their commitment to bringing the world to the island and the island to the world inspires them to passionately share their love for all things Celtic every day in many ways. Please help me welcome Carolyn Phillips Cusson and Renee Cusson to today's lecture.
Thank you, Rebecca. A wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, Fáilte. As was said earlier, this is not only a great turnout, it's a very nicely turned out audience, I can see. And I see a few of you are fellow Celtophiles. It's an honor to be asked to speak to you on a topic that is so close to my heart. And today we'll explore a musical tradition that crossed an ocean, took root in Canada, and continues to sell out theaters, fill festival tents, and make audiences feel something ancient and immediate, all at the same time. We'll look at its journey across continents, across generations, and right into our own backyard here in Canada and Vancouver Island. So our topic is Celtic music. Its roots and resonance, its deep popularity, its unexpected relationship with the orchestra, and what we think we know about it versus what I believe is still untold. But before we dive in, its roots and resonance and its deep popularity is quite self-explanatory to what we've had. I'm going to give you some personal context to help you understand our perspective and what brings us here today. It all started in 2000, to see if I can advance this, and with what we thought was going to be just a millennium project, just for 1 or 2 years, a piping and dancing school. Because we were hired all over the place to go and do our arts, we thought we'd bring people to our beautiful island. So what we did was we put at this homegrown project, a summer school and concert series called Celtfest Vancouver Island. This was off the side of our desks as professionals in other areas. And again, we thought it would just be temporary. However, it took on a life of its own. It went to 12 years of an annual summer school and concert series up and down the island, plus year-round entertainment and educational events every year since 2025. Every year to now, from now to 2025, and it was entirely volunteer-driven. So I'm going to share with you a video clip, give you an idea of what happened. The soundtrack you heard and many of the shots you just saw were featuring Bioluk, a Canadian band from Nova Scotia, Wendy McIsaac and her group. Some of you may recognize them. And I have to say that it's a testimony to the popularity of Celtic performing arts that with just 4 months lead time, without any support, save the sheer passion and sweat of dozens of volunteers, our inaugural camp at Shawnigan Lake School attracted 400 students as participants and 1,200 concert goers that week. Yeah, the momentum was entirely organic, and it's kind of before the internet really took hold, and I think it was the Jungle Telegraph. More than we realized, it was very popular. So as I say, and Rebecca said earlier, this weekend marked our 25th anniversary, a celebration featuring the Barra McNeils to sold-out houses, both at the McPherson Playhouse and also at the Port Theatre. And we did the math and didn't realize that to date, people from 19 countries have traveled to attend our events. Celting, in our experience, does have allure. So let's look at our agenda for today. So we'll begin with a brief history of music in Canada, the backstory of Celtic music as we have it here in our country, coast to coast, from Cape Breton to Vancouver Island. Then we'll go on to, see if I can get this to work, the wild popularity of Celtic music globally and how that filters into our own ecosystem. It remains popular today, and actually, as it was said earlier, we have the Celtic tenors coming. And why is it that the Barra McNeils and the Celtic tenors sell out year after year? Don't you think people get tired of it? Apparently not. Then we're going to explore the links with orchestral music, which are quite fascinating. And then finally, the future, what we don't know about Celtic music in Canada, and I'm going to offer some perspectives, and I'd be very interested in yours when we get to the Q&A. So let's start with a brief history of Celtic music in Canada, and from all the way around to Vancouver Island. We're going to start with Vancouver Island. Celtic music in Canada began with a massive migration from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and other Celtic regions from the 1700s onward. Many of these newcomers were escaping displacement, famine, or political upheaval, and of course, battle. But they brought with them reels and jigs, ballads and laments, fiddles, pipes, harps, and whistles. And perhaps most importantly, the oral traditions. Gaelic wasn't a written language, but it was a spoken or sung language. You can't separate the music from the stories or even the language itself. In Celtic colors, music is as natural as breathing. And also, a very important point, music wasn't just entertainment. It was an identity, a memory bank, a lifeline. And even today, Celtic music remains close to the oral traditions. That's a topic for a whole other talk. Atlantic Canada is a well-known example. The first great home of Celtic music that's most famous, I suppose even now today, is Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, where Wendy McIsaac is from, actually. They preserved their fiddle traditions, their styles, and their dances, and even those ones that were preserved here in Canada had been lost in Scotland, many parts of Scotland. And they did so up to, the late 19th century. So the Cape Bretoners and the areas of the Gaels that came into Atlantic Canada came by this honestly. The culture had been dying out progressively, globally, as the Highland clearances had happened and the diaspora had happened. And then it turned out before the turn of the last century, there were more Scottish Gaelic speakers in Canada than there were in Scotland. As such, many would characterize Cape Breton as a museum culture. And then they almost lost it again, or so it seemed, when in 1973, CBC aired a series called The Vanishing Cape Breton Fiddler. The population was experiencing yet another diaspora out of the island for people finding work and moving west, finding prosperity. In the process, they were losing the old traditions on the island. So the TV series sparked actually a combination of outrage and determination that spawned the next generation of Canadian Celtic musicians, such as Natalie McMaster and Ashley McIsaac, for instance. And then the backdrop, too, at the time was CBC TV shows like Anne Murray, John Ellen Cameron, Don Messer, and all those Maritimes became front and center. Does anybody here remember Baby Boomers? Yeah. CBC TV on Sunday night. Now, also the Irish Rovers. So, harking to Cape Breton for just a moment, we have been honored to be invited by the Nova Scotia government on several occasions to attend the Celtic Colours Festival. And it's a massive 10-day festival that just takes over the island, where this was captured. And just to give you an idea, here's what Festival Club sounded like a couple of years ago at 2 a.m. while they were trying to shut down for the night. Obviously, they've revived themselves. That was my point.
And it was that loud.
Sorry about that. But the lesser known story is how Celtic culture moved west. Many people think of Celtic culture in Canada as an East Coast story, but it is most certainly also a West Coast story. Lawrence Knight, Bruce Coughlin of Taylor's Folly, among many others, sing of that British Columbia story, and even especially here of Vancouver Island, where we have a deep Celtic root system of our own. And it began actually when settlers came to Vancouver Island. So in the 1840s, many of you know, the Hudson's Bay Company brought Scottish workers to Fort Victoria, and then soon island towns, Nanaimo, Ladysmith, Cumberland, Port Rupert, had logs being cut, mines being dug, and fiddles being played in bunkhouses and community halls by folks with names like Mackenzie, Campbell, and MacDonald. Gaelic was heard on Vancouver Island into the 20th century. Yes, Gaelic was spoken here. Their songs, their mouth music, the milling songs, the Porch de Buil, didn't always get written down, of course, but they shaped community gatherings. And again, important to note, these weren't just immigrants, they were tradition bearers. Their music, from the walking songs. You saw a reference, that was actually shot in VIU, that film you saw at the beginning, of the women and men around the table pounding the cloth. Those were walking songs that we were reenacting here at VIU when we had Keltfest there a few years ago. Anyway, they were all part of everyday life. Many of these communities hosted dances indistinguishable from those in the Scottish Highlands. And by that, I'm saying a fiddler or piper in the corner. He's not quite in the corner, but clogs or boot taps percussing the floor, a caller shouting out the steps, and stories and songs being exchanged between tunes. Then came a West Coast revival, as this was actually not just a Celtic revival, but also a folk revival. As we know, it was happening globally as well. As was the case throughout Canada, from the 1970s onwards, Celtic folk bands formed across Vancouver Island and then grew from there. Festivals like the Victoria Highland Games, which had been running for 100 years, and they're shown here. You see some of my wee dancers gathered around our little exhibit table there. And the Vancouver Island Music Festival, the Philburg Festival, and of course, us, began showcasing Celtic performances, musicians, dancers, and storytellers. Pub sessions from Victoria to Salt Spring revived musical gathering traditions. And then today we have venues like Vancouver Island Pipers Club, the Victoria Folk Music Society sessions, and the newer Campbell River Highland Gathering, all of which Renee and I have performed recently, have grown into vibrant year-round communities. So if you walk into a pub on the island on a Sunday afternoon and you hear a whistle, a band player warming up or tuning a fiddle, you're hearing more than just music. You're hearing continuity, a tradition that crossed an ocean and found a home on the Pacific Rim. Today, Vancouver Island has one of the most active Celtic scenes in Western Canada, full of musicians and dancers and pipers, and also hybrid orchestral collaborations. So let's turn to why Celtic music is so popular. Returning to that question I posed earlier, why do groups such as the Barra McNeils that we just hosted this past weekend and the Celtic Tenors that the Symphony is going to be presenting soon sell out year after year? Let's start with a little truth first. Celtic music was popular long before there was a music industry. Its popularity today, its ability to sell out the concert halls, to make people cry at Christmas concerts, to get standing ovations from audiences who don't have a single drop of Irish or Scottish blood, comes down to a few profound qualities, in my humble opinion. So here are my top 5. The first one is emotional directness. Music doesn't hide behind complexity in the Celtic world. There's nothing abstract about it. A lament sounds like heartbreak. A good ballad can have lament qualities. Our king is bonny, and there lies my love. My heart it lies on him, and will not remove. It will not remove, oh, for all that I have done. And I'll die if I don't get me love and a key. A reel sounds like joy. Kieran and a feber, Kieran and a feber, down Sean Dolas. Kieran and a feber, Kieran and a feber, Sean down Dolas. A march, on the other hand, sounds like resolve. Step we gaily, on we go, heel for heel and toe for toe, arm and row and row, all for Mari's wedding. He wrote that one, by the way. Now, Strasbourg, a very interesting genre that is very distinct in the Scottish group of tunes, it can be a little bit diverse. So it depends on where you hear it. It can sound like a Scotch snap, like a horse going over cobblestones, or it can go to soaring elevation. So, first example. Kimmerini dans ce deal, kimmerini la voya, kimmerini dans ce deal, calamafri mishpam mahata, kimmerini dans ce deal, kimmerini miri la voy, kimmerini dans ce deal, calamafri mishpam mahata. And then it can sound like. And then there's the jig, which we all know and love. So, the holly green, the ivy green, the prettiest picture you've ever seen. It's Christmas in Killarney, like all of the folks at home. Okay. So you get the picture that you don't have to understand the music to feel it. And you can feel the different qualities. And there's a primal understanding that just seems to seep into your soul, and there's a visceral reaction we get from our audience members. So when the Barra McNeils play their Christmas show, they tap into an emotional vocabulary based on those things. So family, longing, celebration, nostalgia, loss, hope. These are all universal human emotions. And the music goes straight to the heart. It transcends borders and generations, and it doesn't need explaining. So my second reason that Celtic music is so popular is the amazing blend of sorrow and joy. Few traditions can shift so gracefully from heartbreak to dancing. You'll cry in the first piece and then you'll clap in the second piece. And we see that at our concerts all the time. That emotional spectrum feels deeply human and resonates with modern audiences longing for authenticity and belonging. And the third reason, it's participatory. Even in a concert hall, Celtic music invites people to join. Clap, sway, hum, laugh at the stories, feel the ribbon, hear the traditional call and response. Mary Mac's mother's making Mary Mac, marry me.
My mother's making me marry Mary Mac.
I was going to teach that to you, but later. And the performers speak to the audience, not at them. The Barra McNeils Christmas shows work because they feel like family gatherings. So number 4 of my top 5 reasons that Celtic music is so popular. It feels old and new at the same time. Familiar, yet fresh. So Celtic music holds ancient traditions, but it evolves constantly. You'll hear tracks of the same piece, for instance, that integrate new harmonies, modern arrangements, fusions with pop, orchestral, and world genres. Capercaillie in Scotland, particularly in the 90s, set a real standard for fusing jazz with some of the old traditional music, including Gaelic, actually. And more locally in BC, we've had popular bands like Delhi to Dublin, fusing world genres, as you know. People get both comfort and surprise when they see this. Groups like the Barra McNeils and the Celtic tenors succeed year after year because they deliver both traditional and innovation, and they give audiences the comfort of the familiar and the thrill of the unexpected. And maybe the biggest reason of all that Celtic music is so popular, Celtic music is about story. Every song is a story. Every tune has lineage. Every performance has a narrative arc. And as we know, humans are wired for story. And Celtic music has endless stories to tell. I'm going to add one rather prominent theme to this, actually, that occurred to me after I'd done these slides, and that's the emotions around the construct of home. Largely due to the diaspora and the displacement of Celts, their arts have resulted in a real powerful tug of the heartstrings, home and hearth. People often leave our concerts saying, I don't know why, but that feels like home. Speaking of home, there's this guy. You might recognize this superstar with Celtic roots. Do you recognize him? No, not yet. I'll give you more clues. The crowd goes wild when the pipers enter on the piece Mull of Kintyre. And by the way, there's someone other than Sir Paul that you might recognize in this shot. If you look up second to the right, that's this guy.
Oh, yeah. That was fun.
So Mull of Kintyre, is my point, is actually about home, or where you feel a longing, feel home. And I've sat through that concert, I don't know how many times live with Paul McCartney. Everybody cries or laughs, or there's just emotion that just comes right out of it. And then speaking of home, there's this band that many of you will not know. To me, they're kind of a modern day version of the Beatles in my mind. It's an all-boy Celtic rock band from Scotland who are incredibly popular with young people. They were voted 3 times Scotland's best live act with the BBC Awards within a space of about 8 years recently. And you'll see them here when we presented them at the McPherson Theatre when they made their inaugural performance in Canada. The 2 Gillespie brothers who formed the band, one of whom is on this banner over here, may have gotten your attention when you came in. They had grandparents from the Isle of Tiree and the Hebrides, where we were fortunate to be invited to their annual Tiree Music Festival that they started as a result of their grandparents' summer home. They'd spend summers there. And with the popularity of Celtic music, I realize we're in Scotland, but people travel from all over and swell the island up. The Isle of Tiree normally has a baseline of about 500 people living there, and it swells to 5,000. And there's a very diverse demographic that bridges young and old, and that sense of home when they sing is overwhelming. And if you note, there's a picture on the picture you'll see a person waving a Scottish flag. I just want to say that's not a plant. That was not posed, that was spontaneous. Those were people actually from Victoria who felt that sense of place and decided they knew Scary Boar's music, and they brought the flag along, and out it came. So let's turn to the tie between traditional Celtic music and the orchestra. Pretty fascinating. Why does Celtic music blend so naturally with symphonic performance? Why do Celtic Women, the Chieftains, Natalie McMaster, and Symphony Nova Scotia's Celtic fusion concerts feel so natural? Well, firstly, they have a shared musical DNA. For people who are nerds, you will know that both traditions use ancient modes, and they tend to evoke a timeless, haunting atmosphere perfect for strings and woodwinds. The second reason is narrative structure. Classical music's movements tell stories. Celtic tunes are stories, and there's no translation required. Third reason, dance rhythms fit orchestrational scoring. Now, this is close to my heart because, as was mentioned, I am a Highland dance teacher, and it's really a joy to mount choreography and even traditional pieces with orchestral arrangements of reels, jigs, strass bass, hornpipes. Those in particular have rhythmic patterns that orchestras can easily score, and they can expand and they can dramatize. Next reason, emotional depth. The orchestra amplifies the emotional qualities already present in Celtic music. So the clarinet or the violin can extend the lament of an air. The percussion section can drive a reel. You don't have to have a boran either. The brass can uplift a march, and strings can deepen the nostalgia of a ballad. So these partnerships create music that feels both ancient and symphonic. And then lastly, I'd like to point out this tie I think is really fascinating, is the communal spirit, the collective voice. So a Celtic session is the folk equivalent of an orchestra. So a gathering of musicians, they play together, they're weaving harmony, and they're building a shared sound. And interesting enough, the transition from pub session to concert hall is more natural than it seems. Last weekend when we hosted the Barra McNeil's and celebrate our 25th with some local Celtic superstars, we had the young group, Daniel Lapp and his BC Fiddle Orchestra. And there's a classical example where they're playing folk tunes in a concert hall. And these very same young children, young people, and the adults with them, of course, play in various places. Especially the older ones play in pubs. I guess the younger ones get into pubs because they play. Okay, so let's talk to the future, our fourth point, the future. Ideas and perspectives on Celtic music in Canada. So Canada does talk a lot about Celtic music. We listen to it, whether we know it or not. I'll talk about that in a moment. We celebrate it. In July, Heather Rankin of the Rankin family was awarded the Order of Canada. And a decade ago, so was Alistair McGillivray, a notable songwriter also from Cape Breton. In fact, they play his composition, Marion Bridge, on the Peace Tower Carillon bells, still to this day. But to my mind, there are gaps. There are stories that we haven't yet explored, questions we haven't asked yet, opportunities that we haven't taken. So let me talk about what I think we don't know yet and how that might bode into the future. I'm going to share a few ideas on this as I shift topics from history to curiosity. So Canada's Celtic story is more diverse than we realize. We celebrate Scottish and Irish traditions, but we often forget Welsh choirs, Cornish songs, Breton dances. I'm going to treat you to something here. Breton music and dance tunes. All right, so that was actually shot in Canada. They're newfound friends of ours from Lorient, the home of the world's largest Celtic festival, and probably the home of the largest music festival anywhere in the world, where they have 14,000 volunteers alone just to run their festival.
Where did you say? I didn't hear you.
Lorient, so Brittany.
In France.
Brittany, yeah. So I'm talking about Breton music and dances. Thanks for asking. And this is an interesting fusion that they have just organically done. So he's a professor of music, and she also teaches music in the same faculty. And they came out to explore what Canada had to offer, which isn't an unusual thing for people to come to Cape Breton and do this. And so he's playing a traditional Breton piece, and she's actually doing Cape Breton step dancing with the Breton music. So that may not be significant to most people here, but to nerds like me, I think it's fascinating. And this is an area too that we have roots in our Canadian population that share this background. So that's one unexplored area. And then the next one is the Galician Celtic piping tradition. So I'm just going to talk about this amazing man, Carlos Nunez, that we've had the pleasure of presenting as recently as last year in Sydney. And so he was dubbed the seventh chieftain, they used to call him, because as a young boy, they had met actually in Lorient in Brittany years ago. The chieftains had met, and they just took him in, and he became a person who adopted the native Spanish. Galicia in the northwest corner of Spain has their own 1,000-year-old piping tradition, and he just kept expanding that with all the cathedral music and all the Hispanic, arguably, in the Spanish culture. So what I'm going to play for you just quickly, Renee is going to play, is just a snippet of a piece that might bend your ear a little bit, and it's actually Brazilian. You'll hear him playing. This is a live performance at Lorient. So you'll hear him talking about it. Just listen to the vibes for a second.
On voyage maintenant jusqu'à le Brésil celtique. On a fait un album là-bas il y a quelques années. Même les Brésiliens étaient venus ici à Lorient, on se souvient, incroyable. Ça s'appelle Chotes. Chotes, ça vient de Scottish. Donc, cher public, s'il vous plaît, standing up. Arriba, le Brésil. Non, on a des Brésiliens dans la salle aussi. Bravo. Des Brésiliens dans la salle. Super. Hola, boa noite.
All right, so you get the vibe. He's talking about this being Scottish. So this is again part of the diaspora, where we've had Celtic people going into places in different areas. Cuba, the Osterian traditions, very similar, and they have their own bag, and they're very curious and fascinating. We have that here in Canada, is my point. There's much we can do to mine this wonderful mosaic we have here in Canada of our traditions and our cultures. And there's also the dance form. So just casting your eyes to the photo for a second, in the Sydney show, you'll see I took them out to the lobby, and these are the people that I and a couple of other dance teachers choreographed for in one show. We had Highland, we had Irish, and we had salsa. And they were all part of his tradition. So very, very interesting. I think it's fascinating. And the dance forms, and that's a whole other talk on the dance forms and how they've evolved around the music. But I believe one of the most overlooked stories in Canada is the Celtic Indigenous musical exchange. This is one of the most overlooked aspects, as I said, of Canadian musical history. We rarely discuss how these European and Indigenous music and dance forms meet. Tomorrow I teach an Indigenous business class, and it's very interesting, the diversity in our own Canadian populations and how many of them tell me about their Scottish and or French ancestry alongside their Indigenous. In communities where these Scots, in particular French and Indigenous peoples, lived in close proximities like Atlantic Canada and the prairies, and as I said, yes, here in the West Coast, there were a lot of musical exchanges that resulted. So fiddle tunes were shared, drumming patterns influenced step dancing, dances crossed cultural boundaries, storytelling traditions also blended. This picture I have up here is to do with my delight in meeting the founder of a group called the Ashram Stompers, pardon me. And here is Arnold at age, if you were to actually go online and look at it, he's well over 70, I think he's 75 or so, and he's dancing with this group that he's got going for several decades now. And he explained to me that his dancers perform like the Red River Jig, and they built a whole festival around there in the prairies, a traditional Métis dance that they use to preserve and share their culture. But at least as importantly, is it promotes social skills, physical fitness, and mental wellness among the youth in their prairie community. And for this reason and so many levels, I believe this cross-pollination deserves more research and recognition in Canada, all the way across our country. But perhaps I'm biased here due to my lived experience and my ancestry. I have a lot of exposure to the beautiful Métis arts, music and dances. Here's me this past summer in front of a fur trader mansion on the St. Lawrence River, built in the early 1800s by my ancestor, John Macdonnell, together with his Métis wife, Magdalene Poitras. You'll see her picture in that stained glass behind me in the door. She's my 3 times great-grandmother, built this house that's now a heritage site. So, and my point here is it features a big ballroom. So he must have been my ancestor. Music came over. Okay, another topic related to actually, I'm just going to leave it there, is Celtic influences in film and media, and gaming even today. And these are kind of hidden, but they're there. Canadian composers are integrating more Celtic motifs, and they're shaping soundtracks and fantasy TV, films, and video games. And audiences actually hear Celtic sounds constantly and often without knowing it. Some of us remember the obviously Celtic soundtracks of films like Braveheart and Rob Roy, but then came Game of Thrones. And those of us that had children at that age at the time it came out is How to Tame Your Dragon. And related to that too is just in Canada, the hidden influence on Canadian folk we've been listening to. As I mentioned, all those CBC programs. But our national folk sound, its lilt, its melodic arc, its narrative ballads, owes heavily influence to the Celtic tradition. So, we usually think of, singing around the campfire as Canadian songs, like Four Strong Winds, but the structure, rhythm, and melodic style of Canadian folk music tie in, like the way the fiddle rises and falls, the cadence of folk ballads, step dance rhythms. And you don't have to just think people that were, Atlantic kitchen party products of those like Alan Doyle, Rankin Family, or Ennis Sisters. You can also think Gordon Lightfoot, Joni Mitchell, Ian and Sylvia Tyson, the Bare Naked Ladies, Spirit of the West, of course, the Tragically Hip, Sarah McLachlan, and that's just to name a few that have Celtic fingerprints in their art. So we also are going to see more hybrid and progressively global things come about. There's new fusion styles happening all the time. And that's related, I think, to the continued digitalization, especially since COVID. We have digital sessions going on. We actually participated in some over COVID. We blasted all over the world to Africa, to Scotland, and that's just going to be a trend coming up. So there's another opportunity that the future holds. And I think, it's just evolving in ways that we've barely begun to explore. So, and in our cultural mosaic, I just need to close with this story. There's another distinctly Canadian musical experience that drove this point home. In 2024, I was asked to speak at a joint Robbie Burns Chinese New Year dinner called Gung Haggis Fat Choi. And that was in Vancouver's Chinatown, and it's run annually by Todd Wong, alias Toddish McWong, who gave me the topic of saying, what would Robbie Burns think of this cultural fusion? I looked around, I'd already written my speech, but what I noticed were lighthearted shares of distinct and mutual cultural experiences, performance and literature between the Scots and the Chinese folks sharing. In fact, it was a true Canadian ceilidh. So my answer to this question in my speech was very simple. Robbie Burns would have loved it. He, a humanitarian before all, believed race was a human construct. And in the true spirit of Celtic inclusivity, at gatherings like this, when Celtic music and dance happen, we are all one. But what happened later in the parking lot really drove this home for me. A young Chinese woman approached me to say she had recently moved to Vancouver as an immigration lawyer and had brought some clients to that event. Particularly with the aggressive acts of hate during COVID being aimed at her community, she really didn't know what to expect. But she said after my talk and learning about the ethos of this fusion event, she'd never been to a ceilidh before, she said she had never felt so included anywhere outside of her community since she'd moved to Canada. And to me, that is the magic of Celtic in a nutshell. So I hope this talk has given you more insights into the universal allure of Celtic music and why it matters. And I hope that you can appreciate fully, as we do, that the Celtic performing arts in Canada are not relics. They are a composite of living, breathing traditions that crossed the Atlantic, found new life from coast to coast here all the way to our Vancouver Island. And though for centuries before that, Celtic music traveled thousands of miles and survived centuries of change, it still continues to grow and be a significant force and a positive force in our musical arts landscape. Celtic music does matter because it connects us to our roots, even if we aren't Celtic. It gives us joy, comfort, and shared celebration. It brings old and new, local and global together. It opens doors to new collaborations. It reminds us that identity is not fixed. And above all, on Vancouver Island, just as the East Coast and around the globe, Celtic music is not a museum piece. It's a heartbeat. You hear it in the pubs, the festivals, dance halls, rooms, living rooms, and orchestras. And you hear it in the laughter at the ceilidhs. We experienced that actually in North Nanaimo the other weekend at the Simon Holt restaurant with Troy and Andrea. You hear it in the stories behind the tunes, the silent moment before a slow air begins, and you even hear it at Chinese New Year while you eat chow mein and haggis. It thrives because it speaks to something universal: joy, sorrow, community, story, identity. The history of Celtic music in Canada is still being written. And as we've discovered during the past 25 years, every person in this room, musician or listener, newcomer or traditional bearer, is part of that story. And its future, like its past, is full of possibility. Tapalev, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. That was fantastic. So last weekend I went to visit my sister who has 3 young daughters who all Irish dance. And they had just been at a Irish Indigenous dance festival. And my sister was scratching her head. But now, having listened to you talk about the collaboration, our shared history of building Canada, of all these different groups of people having to come together to survive through our cold winters, it makes perfect sense that the Irish dancers and the Indigenous community in downtown Eastside had a dance festival. Now I'm going to phone her back and say, oh, it all makes sense now. I'll tell you why. The storytelling is so true. And we all love stories, and we all love being told stories.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of time for questions. Has anyone in the audience today got a question for either Carolyn or Renee?
I hope it's not too tangential to the music story, but the diagram, the symbol, on so many of your slides, I'm guessing ties the strong Indigenous links in art that I see, but to the Celtic story as well.
Yes.
And I apologize that in my ignorance I'm missing that.
You are very observant.
So for anyone who didn't hear the question, it was asking about the tie of the symbol, the Indigenous and
I'll get around.
Celtic symbol we've seen in many of the slides.
Yeah, so that's good. My cousin Genevieve went to medical school at Dalhousie, and she was born and raised in BC. And she had put this symbol together. She originally had Haida backs here, and it was just a way of making money to afford afford her medical school training. So if you look really closely, it was about her experience as her dad had, my cousin, Don McDonnell, had gone to Japan and taught English. So long story short, she grew up with this yin-yang symbol, and to her this was home and identity. So there was this. Around here, the border is actually ravens and dragons. So it indicates the Pacific Rim. And the ravens are our family in MacDonnell. Crest is Kragan Fiach, Raven on the Rock. So it's all ties together. What is not really said to me is the Highland Scots in particular are Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of books written on that. Anyway, so thank you for asking. Any other questions?
One at the back there.
Do you two perform together?
We do,
We do.
under duress. Yeah. Thank you.
And not always duress.
Do you have any concerts coming up?
You know what, I'd encourage you, thank you for that. There's our barcode just down at the bottom there. I'll put out some, we just do them spontaneously, but we do have the laid on concerts. Like we actually have the Barra McNeils coming back. Renee does wind up playing often with the Barra McNeils. I usually wind up being too busy to do anything that involves singing or percussion, but my dancers are in that show. And they're coming to Parksville. They're doing their non-Christmas show for the first time in 12 years to mark their 45th anniversary as a band. And it's going to be in Parksville June 18th. And we'll probably do a lobster boil. So how's that for bringing east to west?
Fantastic.
So, but thank you for asking.
June, though.
I'll
We
put
have
our cards out
bit to
too.
wait till June.
We do weddings, funerals, we certainly do funerals.
But we do have the good fortune at times to be asked to play with these different bands and so on. We perform with Carlos Nunez. Carolyn has sung with him. I've piped with him. They play some of my music. And as we had said earlier, we like the idea of taking what we have to the rest of the world too, because there's so much great music even being written out here on the coast. So we don't want it all just coming one way, bringing it in from the East Coast. We like to make sure that we're
Or
helping
Spain.
to export and
Yep.
talk about the talent we have out here as well.
Anybody else? Oh, there's one in the front.
One of your very early pictures had I thought it was a table of women.
Yes.
And you mentioned, did you call it the walking?
Yes, they're walking the cloth,
They
W-E.
have no instruments, nothing in their
Nope,
hands.
it's all mouth music.
Looked like so much fun.
Yeah, yeah. When they didn't have their pipes, especially, and they didn't have their fiddles, and they were band, they still had their voices. So walking is like a Porsche de Biel is a mouth music.
But they did that, they had that going because, of course, to keep the rhythm and work the cloth and so on together,
'Cause they had
very
to
heavy,
shrink the cloth once it
soaking
was
wet, heavy
spun.
tartan wool. To be able to move it and work it, you had to have these songs.
And then they push it sideways. We still do that in,
Yeah.
well, Cape Breton, we see the milling, they call them milling frolics there. And they're, if you get a chance to go see one, they're really lots of fun.
And it's not just
Or
the
be
women,
one.
the men too, although it was predominantly women. I mean, the men were out there, the hunter-gatherers, well, the women were working the cloth and so forth.
Their gab session.
Yeah,
That's right.
having a lot of fun doing it too. Still a lot of fun.
Well, it's been a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for
Oh,
telling
thank
us this
you.
great stories. I remembered a line you said, which is you don't have to be Celtic to feel it. And I definitely agree with you. I agreed with you before you spoke and all the more now. And we will wait in 8 days' time to feel it again in the Port Theatre, if you will join us. So
Yes.
thank you so much for presenting us. Your life in Celtic culture. We can't wait to get more.
Thank you, and get in
Thank
touch.
you.
There's my coordinates there, and we have our barcode there, and we'll put some cards out there. It's
And
delightful
Scary
to
Vor
be-
will be coming too, to the island.
The guy without,
Not to
he'll-
Nanaimo,
He
unfortunately.
might wear a
but,
shirt, though.
You might.
But they will be at McPherson and at the Hollywood in Vancouver.
Thank you very much.